Bill is the Managing Director of Haskett Consulting International Companies in the U.S. and Canada. In this capacity and in his earlier position of Chairman and Senior Principal for Energy Strategy with Decision Strategies, Bill has served clients, companies, and countries worldwide. Today he will discuss a project involving technical and strategic decisions being made amidst dysfunctional rancor and mistrust. Sounds interesting. Please welcome our speaker and session co-chair, Bill Haskett.
Okay, so I was on a consulting project. The phone rings, and it's another client that we had, and they say, come help us. We have an emergency. We have the need of some value of information assessment. And we sit there and so, okay, can you tell me a little bit more? We were, a few thousand miles away from them, but we had spare time. It was in the middle of travel. So surprised the client by saying, okay, well, if you're available tomorrow, I'll be at your office. And so that was a shock. I get there and say, tell me more. And they say, well, it's a bit of a mess. And they say, the good news is that we made a discovery. And so here's the discovery situation. The discovery is the black dot, the open circles with the cross through them for the non-petroleum people. Those are dry holes, so nothing was found. The client has the yellow acreage, and then the sort of orangey acreage down at the bottom is 20% client-owned and 80% large international company, BP. And then on the upper side there's a state energy company and a local indigenous company, a local company called Wahudumu. And of course, as you can probably guess, these are all made-up names. But Wahudumu is a local company, and they are not technically savvy, but they're pretty active. And the state energy company has a conflict of interest because the state energy company has directors on the review panel or review board for any development scenario that happens. Okay, so we have a conflict of interest situation developing in a competitive context. Now, we don't know with this one well whether it's just a discovery that's that large, two discoveries. These are structural contours, and oil floats, so it goes up to the top there in the structure. Or in the best situation, it could be that big. Okay? We don't know. The explorationists were the one that made initial contact with us and said, oh, we need to find out the value of drilling a well just right up in that area. So actually, it's just on the acreage there, on the yellow, as far northeast as you can go on the yellow. The problem is that if somebody drills there and they find a discovery, the problem is that now they have to do a development scenario, development plan, a production license application that covers the entire area. And any offsetting group, any offsetting rights owner that feels that the resource spreads onto their acreage can hold up the process and force you to drill development wells in order to ascertain how much they actually have. So here's the situation with the government, or the ownership. The government has regulatory oversight And the state energy company is part of the government and part of the oversight board, which causes a big conflict if you get overexcited about what you've discovered. It attracts attention, and since we don't know if there's anything there yet, we don't really want the client to be, oh boy, yay, we found all sorts of stuff. So the players in this situation, they hate each other. They don't like each other in the company, and they don't trust the other companies. They don't trust Wahudumu, and they don't trust the state energy company. And to the extent that if, one of them told me this, that if they get on the bus in the morning and there's an engineer from the other company that gets on the bus, or the tram, as it were, in the morning, they will get off and wait for the next tram so as to avoid all contact with them. It's that bad. So Francois, the CEO, he wants the group to make a unified decision. He doesn't really care what they do as long as they get it together and make the unified decision that they can all back. So he's looking for commitment, but he hasn't really established good objectives. Olaf, he's the new VP of accounting. He's on the decision team. This is his first energy project. He came from a large accounting firm, and we had to do a primer on what oil and gas was. Right? Gas is not the thing that you put into your car. Henri, who's the VP of Government Affairs, says we cannot trust the government or their puppet state energy company. Now pay attention to the little trigger words in there because they become important. Then Mobu, who's the VP of Engineering, says, I worked for Wahudumu. They don't know what they're doing. They hate us. They will do anything to cause trouble. Okay? We need to develop now, and I have the plan already. Here it is. Okay? From a decisions perspective, you know that that's probably not what you're going to go with, but it might be. Shauna, the VP of Exploration, is saying we can't drill, we can't develop now. We have to drill because we don't know what we're going to develop. And the VP of Engineering needs to go, as in she's advocating for Mobu to be fired or replaced. Better words, replaced. And Edouard, who's the VP of Planning, just sits back and says, please just tell me what we need to do. You're a consultant guy? Tell me. The decisions, when I showed up, it sounded like initially, or what they were saying, when I showed up, or Tyler's, your mic was on. When I showed up, it was just a VOI, just a VOI. But as soon as you start asking questions, you find out that they actually have a whole series of decisions that they need to do. So drill the eastward structure now or delay. Apply for the production license, local to just what they discovered. So it's far away from anybody else, so they can't really object. Or for the entire block. Do you involve the local company in the extension decision, or do you not? Can you pre-produce through a temporary facility? And what are the export choices? And you notice those last ones are tactical, but they were confounding the team, and they were causing a lot of anger. People were shouting at each other. Not happy. It wasn't a happy company. Now, if you've seen others of my talks over the years, you've probably seen this before. I look at competitive advantage as a higher order objective. And to have competitive advantage, you typically have to control your own destiny. Now, you break down the objectives, or you break down the behaviors into 4 different quadrants: people and skills, product and the product that you're going to have, the image or the social, the outward image of the company, and the financial capability of the company. Ideally, you need strategies and plans in each of those. And if you think back to your strategy education days, you can see structure, strategy, and systems all have to blend to have a good thing. So it's an all-encompassing model that I really like to use. Now, we have the company individuals hating each other. We have the company individuals being mistrustful of the other companies. So how do you handle a situation where there's so much conflict that it's destroying morale? It's building up walls internally. Well, I'm going to divert a little bit into a little bit of theory here because I want you to understand the three basic components of commitment. How do you get a group or a company to commit to something? And it's a combination of reward, of commitment theory, and of power, recognizing where the power lies and recognizing if there is or could be a power gap. Okay? So we're going to treat the company as a person, because if I go in and I start to talk to Shona about Mobu, it gets emotional. And so instead of dealing with the interpersonal relationships, let's get them to talk about dealing with the intercompany relationships first. And what happens then, or what I saw happen, was it started to have a little bit of a transference effect. They started to take the attitude of companies as people, and the characteristics of the companies were then applied to the people. It made it a lot easier. So let's look at reward theory first. There's intrinsic reward and extrinsic reward. Extrinsic reward is the stuff that you can touch, feel. It's the paycheck. It really is ephemeral. It leads to a, well, what have you done for me lately attitude. It's like air travel miles. Every year you go to zero because the airline says, well, what have you done for me lately? Intrinsic rewards are the stuff that you feel. It's the personal. It's very hard to quantify. You can try to grow it, but you have to do it in the right way in order to grow the thing that the person wants, that they value. The red part just came back on there. It's a reminder that reward alone almost never works by itself. You have to combine it with means and approaches to garner commitment and to recognize there can't be a large power discrepancy. So commitment theory, I follow the Allen and Meyer mode where they look at effective, continuance, and normative. What do those words mean? Well, do you have common objectives? That's the first part. So if there's no common objectives, you try to create common objectives. And how I did this in the sessions, where I would go one-on-one with the people, and we would have conversations, remembering that I'm not trying to capture notes. I'm not trying to analyze anything. I'm trying to get them to tell me what's important to them so I can understand what their objectives are. And when I find matching objectives with people that they don't hate, I end up having that other person bring up those objectives in the joint meetings. Because if you have person A and person B that are arguing and are biased against one another, if I can get person C who agrees with some of the objectives of person A to bring up those objectives, person B is more likely to participate. Okay? So to destroy a company, it's divide and conquer. To build a company, it's divide and link. Okay? Think of it in that way. So the next part is the continuance is there a hurdle to change? And is this hurdle real or is it just perceived? They're going to commit to something as long as there's no hurdle. Said that opposite. They're going to commit. You want the commitment to be sticky. And so they are going to be committing to it, and so you want a hurdle to change. You don't want, if you own an iPad or one of those fruit phones, you'll want to stay with the fruit phone until they do something nasty. So what's the hurdle to move? And then, has an obligation been created? You'd like to create a friendly obligation. And a friendly obligation is one that is not imposed on the people, that is willing, not a simmering obligation, but a willing obligation. Okay? So senior management had varying levels of commitment, and they had varying levels of objectives. So there was a lot of sitting back and linking the objectives to one another and linking the people. Because once we got commonality on objectives, the people that were arguing with each other had common ground to start talking at least. And that was a huge problem. Now, I will say that the VP of engineering did burn out in the process, and they elected to retire rather than go forward. But they started to participate as a regular member, and they were no longer ostracized after doing this. But there is a lot of conflict there. In power, I look at, and there's a lot of documentation, a lot of papers on where power comes from, and I use a 6-source model. Coercive is like the stick, reward is the carrot, legitimate is contractual, and reference is respect. You have to look at power in the context of what you have, what you would like to have, and what other people have. If you have a concentration on, say, coercive and reward, then you're going to have trouble in any negotiation, such as trying to negotiate reduction of nuclear arms in Korea. Just won't work if all you go at it is coercive. So this is their perceived power. That's their assessment of where they thought they had the most power, or where they thought they had power. In actuality, it ended up being that. They had a lot more referent power than they thought they had. They thought because they hated all of the other companies hated them, which was not correct. One of the tasks that we set out was half the executive team was obligated to call up their counterpart in one of the other companies that they hated and just go for a non-business lunch, because we wanted to personalize the other company. Once you start working on the personal basis, then it's not a faceless company anymore. It's Jorge down in accounting in the other company. And it makes it a lot easier to deal with it. The biggest positive outcome that came from this, besides the group bonding together and coming up with a good set of objectives and a good path forward, was the fact that the companies started working together and were no longer afraid of one another. Okay? So, when you look at what you can do, you do the same decision process as you would any other place. Create objectives hierarchy, use a strategy table to develop themes, go through all of the process as you would normally. But the big difference is how you approach the situation, how you work with the other people, with the people that are having conflict. Ask 4 questions. Is it material? Can you do anything about it? Can you afford to do something about it? And what if you're wrong? The last one is very important because it lets you see the downside risk potential. Those 4 questions you should be asking on pretty much every decision set that you're looking at, and especially if there's conflict. Remember that dysfunction, the only consistent feature of all your dissatisfying relationships is you. Okay? it's a funny ha-ha thing, but that saying, when I showed it to them, it turned some heads in the organization. And this comes from, it's the demotivators at despair.com. Good set of posters. So I've talked about some of the actions. And what I want to emphasize is that we refocused the team on the competitive nature of the ultimate path forward. What are they going to do to create and preserve the competitive advantage? We looked at the power and commitment, saw that they were offset, and there was some power gaps that they thought they had that they didn't, or that they didn't realize that they had. And above all, to make them feel secure in the decisions that they're making, we came up with a set of BATNAs, best alternatives to the negotiated agreement. Our path forward took them through the situation where they would apply for the greater area. If they ran into trouble, they would shrink it back so that the other organization couldn't stop the PLA. And if they did the greater area, great. They would go and do the offset well. In reality, what happened? Remember, you get what you reward. Senior management of the head office senior management was not especially impressed by the strategic approach that the team was recommending jointly. What happened was they said, we just found something big. We can make our stock price move if we make the announcement that it's there. Destroying competitive advantage. And immediately the other companies jumped in, and they were forced to drill 2 extra wells that they didn't have to drill in order to prove that their resource didn't extend onto the neighboring acreage. So it was, overall, it was an exciting time. I went there thinking, oh, it's going to be just a simple VOA. I'll have it done in a couple days. Ultimately, what happened was I got to go, yes, this is fun. Because I like this interpersonal conflict stuff. I like solving that issue. And it was fun. And we made progress, and they did well as a team. Any questions?
Actually, we're out of time, so I'm
Got a minute.
going to ask you to ask questions afterwards with Bill. I want to thank Bill for an entertaining talk. And